The autumn rain had been falling on Nashville for 3 days straight, turning Broadway into a river of neon reflections and turning the cobblestones of Lower Broad slick with memory. Rebecca Anderson clutched her violin case closer to her chest as she hurried down 4th Avenue, her sneakers splashing through puddles that caught the amber glow of streetlights. The case was battered, covered in stickers from every honky-tonk where she'd played in the past 5 years, each one a small victory in a city that chewed up dreamers and spit them out before breakfast. At 28, Rebecca had learned that Nashville didn't care about your story. It didn't matter that she'd grown up in a tiny town in West Virginia, that her mother had died when she was 16, or that she'd taught herself to play violin by watching YouTube videos in the public library. The city only cared about one thing. Could you deliver? And tonight, she had delivered. The session at Blackbird's studio had gone better than she'd dared hope. The producer, a gruff man named Jack Holloway, had actually smiled when she'd finished the final take. "That's the sound I've been hearing in my head for 6 months," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You got something special, Rebecca. Real special." Those words still echoed in her mind as she waited at the crosswalk on Demon Brune Street. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and through the mist, she could see the lights of the Bridgestone Arena glowing like a beacon. Someday, she told herself, someday she'd play there, not in the studio behind the scenes, but on that stage in front of thousands. The walk signal flashed white. Rebecca stepped off the curb, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's rehearsal with the band. She was halfway across when she heard it, the screech of tires on wet pavement, a sound that seemed to stretch time itself into something elastic and terrible. The silver sedan came out of nowhere, hydroplaning around the corner with its headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. Rebecca turned her head, violin case raised instinctively in front of her. But there was no time. The impact lifted her off her feet and sent her spinning through the air. She heard the violin case crack, heard her own scream, and then the world went black for a moment before pain exploded through her right leg like wildfire. She was on the ground, the rain falling on her face, mixing with tears she didn't know she was crying. Her leg was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard voices, panicked, urgent, overlapping. "Someone call 911! Oh my God, is she breathing? Don't move her!" Rebecca tried to speak, tried to tell them about her violin, but all that came out was a whimper. The pain was beyond anything she'd ever experienced, a living thing that consumed every thought. She closed her eyes, willing herself to stay conscious, to not surrender to the darkness that pulled at her like a tide. Then she heard a different voice, calm, steady, with a distinct Texas drawl that somehow cut through the chaos. "I'm here, darling. You're gonna be all right. I got you." Rebecca forced her eyes open. Through the rain and the pain and the blur of shock, she saw a man kneeling beside her. He was older, maybe in his 70s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans that were now soaked through. His face was weathered but kind, with eyes that held a depth of understanding that made Rebecca feel, for just a moment, that maybe he was right. Maybe she would be all right. "My violin," she managed to whisper. The man glanced at the shattered case a few feet away, rain pooling around it. "We'll worry about that later," he said gently. "Right now, we need to take care of you." He held her hand while they waited for the ambulance, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm, a gesture so simple and yet so grounding that Rebecca focused on it, used it as an anchor against the pain. He spoke to her in a low, soothing voice, asking her questions to keep her conscious. What was her name? Where was she from? What kind of music did she play? "Bluegrass," she managed through gritted teeth. "Country." Anything that tells a story. Best kind there is, the man said, and something in his voice suggested he knew what he was talking about. The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing and lights painting the street in urgent reds and whites. As the paramedics loaded Rebecca onto the stretcher, she tried to find the man again, to thank him, but he'd stepped back into the small crowd that had gathered. The last thing she saw before the ambulance doors closed was his silhouette in the rain, watching her with those kind eyes. Vanderbilt University Medical Center's emergency room was a fluorescent nightmare of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness as doctors and nurses moved around her with practiced efficiency. The words she caught between waves of pain weren't encouraging. Compound fracture, tibia and fibula, extensive damage. We need to get her into surgery, but insurance authorization. Patient's financial situation. Rebecca forced herself to focus, to understand what they were saying. Dr. Patricia Callahan, a sharp-eyed orthopedic surgeon with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, finally sat down beside Rebecca's bed and explained it in plain terms that cut through the medical jargon like a knife. "You've suffered a severe compound fracture of your right leg," Dr. Callahan said, her voice gentle but direct. "The tibia and fibula are both broken, and there's significant soft tissue damage. You need surgery, specialized surgery with plates, screws, and extensive reconstruction. Without it, you're looking at permanent damage, possibly amputation down the line." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. "Okay," she whispered. "Do it." Dr. Callahan's expression shifted, sympathy creeping into her professional mask. "Rebecca, your insurance will cover some of it, but you're looking at about $60,000 out of pocket for the surgery, hospital stay, and initial rehabilitation. Do you have that kind of money? Family who could help?" $60,000. It might as well have been $60 million. Rebecca's checking account had maybe $1,200 in it. She had no family. Her father had disappeared when she was 3, and she'd been on her own since her mother died. The friends she'd made in Nashville were struggling musicians just like her, living gig to gig, dream to dream. "I don't," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "I don't have anyone." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with all the weight of truth. Dr. Callahan's jaw tightened, and Rebecca could see the conflict in her eyes. The oath to heal versus the brutal reality of American healthcare. "We'll stabilize you for now," the doctor said finally. "Get you some pain management and splint the leg. But Rebecca, without that surgery, you're not just looking at losing your ability to walk properly. If infection sets in..." She didn't need to finish. Rebecca understood. She was staring at the possibility of losing not just her music career, but potentially her leg, maybe even her life. All because she'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing a street in the rain. That night, after they'd moved her to a room and pumped her full of enough morphine to dull the physical pain, if not the emotional devastation, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and let herself cry. Not the quiet tears that had mixed with rain on the street, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal and terrified. Everything she'd worked for, every sacrifice, every small victory, it was all crumbling like sand through her fingers. Her roommate, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chen, who'd had hip replacement surgery, listened quietly from behind the curtain divider. When Rebecca's sobs finally subsided into hiccups and exhaustion, Dorothy spoke up. "That gentleman asked about you," she said. "The one who came in with the ambulance." Rebecca blinked, turning her head toward the curtain. "What gentleman?" "Tall fellow, Texas accent thick as molasses. He stayed in the waiting room for hours, asking the nurses about your condition. They wouldn't tell him much, privacy laws and all. but he seemed real concerned. The man from the street. Rebecca had almost forgotten him in the chaos of diagnosis and despair. Did he leave his name? Not that I heard. But one of the nurses, sweet girl named Claire, she seemed to know who he was. Got all flustered when she saw him. He left something for you, though. It's on your bedside table. Rebecca turned her head carefully, mindful of the IV lines. On the small table next to her bed was a card, plain white, with her name written in neat cursive on the envelope. With trembling hands, she opened it. The message inside was simple. Music finds a way. Don't give up. A friend. No signature. No explanation. Just those words and a warmth that spread through Rebecca's chest. A small light against the darkness of her situation. She held the card against her heart and closed her eyes, willing herself to believe it. Music finds a way. She had to believe that. It was all she had left. 3 days passed in a haze of pain medication, consultations with financial counselors who all delivered the same grim news, and sleepless nights punctuated by the beeping of monitors and Dorothy's gentle snoring. Rebecca's leg was splinted and elevated, the swelling gradually reducing, but Dr. Callahan's warning echoed in her mind constantly. Without surgery soon, the damage could become irreversible. On the 4th morning, Rebecca was picking at a breakfast of rubbery scrambled eggs when Dr. Callahan walked in with an expression that Rebecca couldn't quite read. The surgeon pulled up a chair and sat down, which was unusual. Normally, she delivered updates standing up, already halfway to her next patient. Rebecca, I need to talk to you about something remarkable. Doctor, Callahan began, her professional composure cracking just slightly to reveal something that looked like wonder. Your surgery has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. Rebecca's fork clattered against the plastic tray. But I don't have the money. I've been trying to contact loan companies, but someone paid for it, the doctor interrupted gently. Everything. The surgery, the hospital stay, 6 months of physical therapy. The entire bill was settled anonymously last night. The room seemed to tilt. Rebecca gripped the bed rails, certain she'd misheard. That's not possible. That's $60,000. Actually, with the extended care package they purchased, it's closer to $85,000. Dr. Callahan leaned forward, her eyes soft. I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The donation came through a foundation, but the paperwork makes it clear. The donor wants to remain anonymous. They asked for only one thing, that we give you the best possible care. Rebecca's mind reeled. Who would do this? She had no wealthy relatives, no secret benefactors. The only person who'd shown her any kindness during the accident was that man with the Texas accent. And while he'd seemed genuinely concerned, surely. Did the foundation give any details? Anything at all? Dr. Callahan shook her head. Just that someone wanted to help. The administrator who processed it said the donor was very specific about you receiving the best orthopedic surgeon in Nashville, which, if I may say, you already had. And that cost should never be a factor in your recovery. After the doctor left, Rebecca sat in stunned silence. Dorothy peeked around the curtain divider, her wrinkled face split by a knowing smile. See? I told you that man was special, she said. Mark my words, honey. That was your guardian angel. You think it was him? The man from the accident? Dorothy chuckled, settling back into her bed with a satisfied sigh. I've been on this earth for 76 years, and I've learned to recognize the look of someone who gives without expecting anything back. That man had it. Besides, who else could it be? Rebecca wanted to argue, to point out that it could be anyone, but deep down, something resonated with Dorothy's words. The card he'd left, "Music finds a way," suggested someone who understood what her violin meant to her, what music meant to her. Someone who knew that saving her leg was about more than just mobility. It was about saving her dreams. The surgery lasted 7 hours. When Rebecca woke in recovery, her leg was encased in a complex external fixator, a scaffold of metal pins and rods that looked like something from a science fiction movie, but was actually holding her shattered bones in alignment. The pain was intense, even through the medication. But Dr. Callahan's smile when she came to check on her was genuine. "The surgery went better than expected," she reported, reviewing the charts. "The breaks were clean enough that we could align everything properly. You're going to have a long road ahead, Rebecca, but if you're committed to the physical therapy, you should regain full function of your leg. When can I play again?" The question came out before Rebecca could stop it, and Dr. Callahan's expression softened with understanding. "One step at a time. Right now, we focus on healing, then walking, then everything else." But Rebecca needed more than that. She needed a timeline, a goal, something to hold on to. "Please, Dr. Callahan, I need to know. Will I be able to stand for hours? To tap my foot to keep rhythm? To perform?" The surgeon was quiet for a moment, weighing her words. "With dedicated rehabilitation and barring any complications? Yes, I believe you will. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. You're looking at 6 months minimum, possibly a year, before you're back to full performance capability. A year. In Nashville, a year without performing was a lifetime. Relationships with producers evaporated, spots in bands got filled, opportunities moved on to younger, hungrier, more available musicians. But Rebecca was alive, and her leg would heal. And someone incredible, had given her that chance. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Over the following weeks, as Rebecca began the grueling process of recovery, she became obsessed with figuring out who her benefactor was. The hospital's billing department was sympathetic, but firm. The donor's identity was protected by legal agreements, and they couldn't reveal anything beyond what Dr. Callahan had already told her. Rebecca tried different approaches. She called the foundation listed on the paperwork, but they were equally tight-lipped. She posted on social media, hoping someone might come forward, but the responses were mostly well wishes and a few conspiracy theories that went nowhere. She even tried to track down the driver who'd hit her, a young woman named Jessica Palmer, who'd been devastated by the accident, thinking maybe she knew something, but Jessica was just as mystified. "I wanted to help," Jessica had said when she visited, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to set up a GoFundMe, but someone told me it wasn't necessary, that you were taken care of. I'm so sorry for what happened." Rebecca had forgiven her. The accident was just that, an accident on a rainy night. But the conversation left her no closer to answers. It was Claire, the nurse Dorothy had mentioned, who finally gave her a clue. One evening, when she was helping Rebecca with a particularly painful range of motion exercise, Claire let something slip. "You know, when he came in asking about you, I nearly dropped my clipboard," she said casually, adjusting Rebecca's leg. "I've been a fan since I was a little girl. My daddy played his music every Sunday morning." Rebecca's heart skipped. "Who, Claire? Who came in?" The nurse's eyes widened, realizing her mistake. I shouldn't have said anything." "Please," Rebecca begged. "I need to know who did this for me. I need to thank them." Claire bit her lip, clearly torn between professional discretion and compassion. Finally, she sighed. "I didn't hear it from me, all right? But it was George Strait. The George Strait. He was there that night. Saw the whole thing happen. He came to the hospital and stayed for hours, asking about you. And then, a few days later, Your bill was paid in full. Now, I can't say for certain it was him, but George Strait, the king of country, a living legend who'd sold over 120 million records, who'd had more #1 hits than any artist in any genre, who'd been making music since before Rebecca was born. That was who'd been kneeling beside her in the rain. That was who'd held her hand and told her she'd be all right. Rebecca's mind flashed back to that night, to the weathered face and kind eyes, the Texas drawl that had soothed her panic. She'd been in too much pain to recognize him, but now that Claire had said the name, details clicked into place. The way people had reacted in the crowd, the nurse's flustered behavior, the card's message about music finding a way. Why would he do this? Rebecca whispered, more to herself than to Claire. He doesn't even know me. Claire smiled, finishing the exercise and carefully lowering Rebecca's leg. Maybe that's exactly why. Because he could help, and you needed help, and that was enough. That night, Rebecca searched for everything she could find about George Strait. Beyond the music and the accolades, she found stories of his quiet philanthropy, scholarship funds he'd established without fanfare, hospital wings he'd donated to anonymously, families of fallen soldiers he'd supported. A pattern emerged of a man who used his success not for self-aggrandizement, but to lift others up, often without ever wanting credit. In one interview from years ago, she found a quote that made her throat tighten with emotion. "Success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about what you do with what you've been given. And I've been given a lot, so I try to pass it on when I can." Rebecca clutched her phone to her chest, overwhelmed. A stranger, no, not a stranger, a legend, had seen her at her most vulnerable moment and had simply decided to help. No questions, no conditions, no expectation of gratitude or repayment. Just pure, uncomplicated kindness. She wanted desperately to find him, to tell him what his gift meant. But she also understood that he'd chosen anonymity for a reason. George Strait didn't want thanks. He didn't want recognition. He'd done what he did because someone needed help, and he had the means to provide it. So instead of searching for him, Rebecca made a different choice. She dedicated herself to her recovery with a fierceness that surprised even Dr. Callahan. Every painful exercise, every excruciating therapy session, every small victory in the long journey back to health, she approached it with gratitude and determination. She would honor his gift, not with words, but with action. She would prove that his faith in her, in music finding a way, had been well placed. And somehow, someday, she would find a way to pass that kindness forward. Physical therapy was a special kind of torture that Rebecca wouldn't wish on her worst enemy. Her therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Angela Rivera, had 4 arms like steel cables and a philosophy that comfort was the enemy of progress. "Pain is your body's way of talking to you," Angela would say, pushing Rebecca's leg just a fraction further than she thought she could manage. Learn to listen to the difference between pain that's warning you and pain that's just complaining. One you respect, the other you push through. Rebecca learned to tell the difference, but it didn't make the sessions any easier. The external fixator had been removed after 8 weeks, replaced by a cast, and then finally by a heavy-duty brace that allowed for controlled movement. Each transition brought new challenges, new pains, new frustrations. The first time she stood on her own, 3 months after the accident, she lasted exactly 11 seconds before her leg gave out, and Angela had to catch her. Rebecca cried, not from the pain, but from the rage of helplessness, from the fear that maybe she'd never fully recover, that maybe all of this suffering would still leave her diminished. "You lasted 11 seconds, Angela said firmly, helping her back into the wheelchair. "Next week, We'll make it 15. And they did. 15 became 30. 30 became a minute. A minute became 5. Step by painful step, Rebecca reclaimed her body's capabilities. But it wasn't just the physical recovery that challenged her. It was everything else that came with being unable to work, unable to perform, unable to do the thing that defined her. Her savings evaporated quickly. The small apartment she'd rented in East Nashville had to go. She couldn't afford it without gig money. Jack Holloway, the producer from Blackbird Studio, had been sympathetic but honest when she'd called to explain why she couldn't make it to the session he'd tentatively scheduled. "Rebecca, I'm real sorry about what happened," he'd said, his voice heavy with regret. "But this project's on a tight timeline. I gotta find someone else, you understand?" She did understand, even as her heart broke. That session had been her big break, her foot in the door with a major label. Now that door was closed, and she had no idea if another would open. She moved in temporarily with her friend Lynette Morrison, a bassist who lived in a cramped 2-bedroom in Madison with her girlfriend, Kate. They cleared out their storage room, really just a large closet, and helped Rebecca set up a small space with a mattress on the floor and enough room for her wheelchair to maneuver. "It's not much," Lynette had said apologetically, "but it's yours, as long as you need it." The kindness of friends kept Rebecca afloat those months. Lynette and Kate never asked for rent, though Rebecca tried to contribute what little she had. Other musicians from the Nashville scene stopped by with groceries, with encouragement, with stories designed to make her laugh. Danny Chen, a banjo player who'd performed with Rebecca dozens of times, even organized a small benefit concert that raised enough money to cover her living expenses for 2 months. But through it all, Rebecca felt the industry moving on without her. Social media was a constant reminder of everything she was missing. Other musicians posting about gigs, studio sessions, collaborations. Her phone, once buzzing with opportunities, had gone quiet. In Nashville, out of sight truly was out of mind. The violin, her battered, beloved instrument that had cracked in its case during the accident, sat in the corner of her small room, unplayable. She couldn't afford to repair it, and even if she could, she wasn't ready. The thought of holding it, of trying to play and finding her body unwilling or unable, terrified her more than any physical therapy session. 5 months into recovery, Rebecca had graduated from the wheelchair to crutches, and from crutches to a cane. She could walk for short periods without assistance, though her gait was still uneven and her right leg tired quickly. Dr. Callahan was pleased with her progress, but Rebecca was impatient, frustrated by the gap between where she was and where she needed to be. It was a cold February evening when everything changed again. Rebecca was sitting in the tiny living room of Lynette's apartment, scrolling mindlessly through job listings. She needed to find work soon, even if it wasn't music, when Lynette burst through the door with an energy that immediately put Rebecca on alert. "You're not going to believe this," Lynette announced, dropping her bass case by the door. "I was at the Bluebird tonight, right? Open mic like usual. And this guy comes up to me after my set. Robert Campbell. He's a talent scout for the Grand Ole Opry." Rebecca's breath caught. The Grand Ole Opry was hallowed ground, the most famous stage in country music. Performing there was a dream that most Nashville musicians carried, but few ever achieved. "He asked about you," Lynette continued, pulling off her coat and sitting down across from Rebecca. "Apparently, someone told him about what happened, about how you're recovering, and he wanted to know if you were still playing." "What did you say?" "I told him the truth, that you're getting better, that you're the most determined person I know, and that when you're ready, you'll be back and better than ever." Lynette leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Becca, he left his card, said when you're ready to play again, he wants to hear you." Rebecca took the card with shaking hands. Robert Campbell, Talent Relations, Grand Ole Opry. A direct line to the stage she'd dreamed about since she was a girl learning violin in a West Virginia library. "Who told him about me?" Rebecca asked, though part of her already knew. Lynette shrugged. "He wouldn't say. Just that someone he trusted had mentioned you were a violinist worth watching." "Becca, this is huge. This is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around twice." That night, after Lynette and Kate had gone to bed, Rebecca sat in her small room and stared at the broken violin in the corner. For months, she'd been afraid to even touch it, afraid of what it would mean if she tried and failed. But now, with this impossible opportunity dangling in front of her, she realized that fear was just another obstacle to push through. Like pain, like frustration, like all the other barriers she'd overcome. She picked up the case carefully, running her fingers over the cracked leather. The violin inside was damaged but not destroyed. The neck had held, and the body, while cracked, was structurally intact. With the right repairs, it could sing again. The next morning, Rebecca took what little money she had left and brought the violin to a luthier shop on Fifth Avenue. The owner, an old Italian man named Vincent Rossi, examined it with the careful attention of a surgeon. "She's hurt," he said in his thick accent, "but she's not dead. I can fix her. Take me 3 weeks, maybe 4. Cost you $800. $800 Rebecca didn't have. She opened her mouth to say she'd have to wait, to come back when she'd saved enough. But Vincent held up his hand. "I hear things," he said simply. "I hear about a violinist who got hurt, who's fighting to come back. I hear about the music she makes, how it sounds like home feels. You're that girl, yes?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. Vincent smiled, a warm expression that crinkled his weathered face. "Then we make a deal. You pay me when you play the Opry, not before. And when you do, you tell people who fixed your violin." It was kindness again, appearing when she needed it most. Rebecca wanted to argue, to insist she'd find the money somehow, but Vincent was already carefully packing the violin into his work area. "Come back in 3 weeks," he said, "and practice your fingers. They need to remember how to dance." Rebecca left the shop with tears in her eyes and determination in her heart. She had 3 weeks until the violin was ready. 3 weeks to get stronger, to rebuild not just her leg, but her embouchure, her finger strength, her endurance. 3 weeks to prove that music did, indeed, find a way. She attacked her physical therapy with renewed vigor, adding extra sessions when Angela would allow it. She started doing finger exercises, the kind she'd done as a beginner, rebuilding the calluses that had softened during her months of inactivity. She listened to music constantly, training her ear again, reminding herself of the nuances and techniques she'd spent years developing. Danny Chen came by one evening and found her doing finger exercises while simultaneously doing leg lifts, her face set in fierce concentration. "You look insane," he said affectionately. "I have to be ready," Rebecca replied, not stopping. "This is my chance, Danny. Maybe my only chance." "Then we'll make sure you are," he said, pulling out his banjo. "Let's start with something simple. You don't need the violin to remember the music." They spent hours that night working through old bluegrass standards, with Rebecca humming the violin parts while Danny played backup. It was the first time in months that Rebecca had felt like a musician again, and the joy of it was almost overwhelming. When Vincent called 3 weeks later to say the violin was ready, Rebecca went to pick it up with her heart in her throat. He presented it to her like a proud parent, the cracks repaired so skillfully they were barely visible, the strings new and perfectly tuned. "Play something for me," Vincent requested. Rebecca lifted the violin to her shoulder for the first time in 6 months. The familiar weight of it, the curve of it against her neck, brought tears to her eyes. She closed them, took a breath, and began to play Amazing Grace, the first song her mother had taught her, the song that had started everything. Her fingers were stiff, her bow control shaky, but the music that emerged was real and true and alive. When she finished, Vincent was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "That," he said simply, "is why I fix violins. Go make beautiful music, ragazza." Rebecca walked out of that shop on Fifth Avenue with her violin in hand and her cane in the other. And for the first time since the accident, she felt whole. The road ahead was still long. She needed practice, needed to rebuild her stamina, needed to prove she could perform again. But she had her instrument. She had her determination. And somewhere out there, someone believed in her enough to have set all this in motion. George Strait, if it truly was him, had given her more than surgery. He'd given her time. Time to heal. Time to rebuild. Time to rediscover her passion without the desperate pressure of financial ruin. And she was going to make every second of that gift count. She pulled out Robert Campbell's card and called the number before she could second-guess herself. "Mr. Campbell, this is Rebecca Anderson. I'm ready to play." Robert Campbell's office at the Grand Ole Opry was exactly what Rebecca had imagined. Walls covered in photographs of legends, a worn leather couch that had probably hosted more famous musicians than most venues saw in a year, and windows that looked out over the empty stage where dreams were made and broken. "I appreciate you coming in," Campbell said, gesturing for Rebecca to sit. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades in the music business. "I've heard good things about your playing, but I'm going to be straight with you. I need to hear it myself before we talk about anything else." Rebecca had expected this. She'd spent the past 2 weeks practicing 8 hours a day, pushing through the pain in her leg, rebuilding the muscle memory in her fingers. Lynette had helped her run through her repertoire, and Danny had given her brutally honest feedback that had made her better. "What would you like to hear?" she asked, unclasping her violin case. "Something that shows me who you are," Campbell replied, leaning back in his chair. "Don't give me something you think I want to hear. Give me Rebecca Anderson." She thought for a moment, then lifted the violin. Instead of a classic country standard, she played something she'd written herself during recovery, a piece she called Rising. It started slow and melancholic, echoing the dark days after the accident, then gradually built in complexity and tempo, reflecting the struggle, the small victories, the determination. The melody soared and dipped, painting a story without words of someone fighting to come back from devastation. When she finished, her leg was throbbing from standing, but she didn't care. She'd poured everything into those 4 minutes, every ounce of pain and hope and resilience. Campbell was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up and extended his hand. "That was something special," he said, as Rebecca shook his hand. "Raw, honest, and technically brilliant. You've got a gift, Rebecca. The question is, are you ready to use it professionally again?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Even knowing it's going to be physically demanding? Long hours standing, traveling, late nights?" Rebecca met his eyes steadily. "I've spent 6 months learning to walk again. I can handle standing on a stage." Campbell smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he'd been hoping for exactly that answer. "Good, because I've got a proposition for you. We're doing a showcase next month. Up-and-coming talent. Chance to perform on the Opry stage in front of industry people. It's not a guarantee of anything, but it's a door. If you're interested, a door After months of doors closing, finally, one was opening. I'm interested. Then you're in. Showcase is April 15th. You'll have a 15-minute slot. Make it count. Rebecca left the Opry feeling like she was floating, despite the cane she still needed for long walks. April 15th was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare, to build her stamina, to create a set that would prove she wasn't just recovered. She was better than before. The weeks that followed were a blur of practice, physical therapy, and preparation. Angela was thrilled with Rebecca's progress, but warned her not to overdo it. "You're healing beautifully," the therapist said during one session, "but that doesn't mean you're invincible. Your leg needs rest as much as it needs work." Rebecca tried to listen, but the drive to be ready for the showcase consumed her. She practiced standing sets, conditioning her leg to support her for extended periods. She worked with Lynette and Danny on arrangements that would highlight her strengths while accommodating her limitations. And late at night, when her leg ached and exhaustion pulled at her, she thought about George Strait, about the gift he'd given her, about the faith he'd shown in a stranger. She still hadn't found a way to thank him, and the desire to do so gnawed at her. She'd written letters that she never sent, rehearsed speeches that sounded hollow and inadequate. How did you thank someone for literally saving your life and your dreams? What words could possibly be enough? 2 weeks before the showcase, Rebecca got a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a familiar gruff voice greeted her. "Rebecca? It's Jack Holloway, the producer from Blackbird Studio." Rebecca's heart leapt and sank simultaneously, hope and dread mixing into something complicated. "Jack, hi. I'm sorry again about missing that session. Stop apologizing," Jack interrupted. "I'm calling because I heard you're playing the Opry showcase." "Yes, on April 15th. "Good. I'm going to be there. And if you play half as well as you did that night at Blackbird before everything went sideways, we're going to talk about rescheduling that session." Rebecca nearly dropped the phone. "Are you serious?" "I don't make calls like this if I'm not serious. The project got delayed anyway. Label politics, the usual nonsense, which means the timing might actually work out better now. But Rebecca, I need you to understand something. If we do this, I need 100%. No hesitation, no doubt. You in or you out?" "I'm in," Rebecca said firmly. "All the way in. Then knock 'em dead at the showcase. And Rebecca, I'm rooting for you." The call ended, and Rebecca sat in stunned silence. Another door opening. Another chance. The universe seemed to be conspiring to prove that music really did find a way. April 15th arrived with perfect spring weather. Clear skies, warm breeze, the kind of day that felt like a blessing. Rebecca arrived at the Grand Ole Opry 4 hours before call time, her violin case in one hand and her cane in the other. The cane had become more of a security blanket than a necessity in recent weeks, but she wasn't ready to give it up entirely. Backstage was controlled chaos. Sound checks, nervous performers, industry people with clipboards and calculating expressions. Rebecca found her assigned dressing room, a small space she was sharing with 2 other acts, and began her routine. Warm-up exercises for her fingers and her leg, meditation to calm her nerves, review of her set list. She'd chosen 3 pieces. Rising, the composition she'd played for Robert Campbell, a traditional bluegrass number called Whiskey Before Breakfast that would showcase her technical skill, and a new arrangement of Tennessee Whiskey that blended classical violin with country soul in a way that she hoped would be memorable. Lynette stopped by an hour before Rebecca's slot, bringing flowers and a fierce hug. "You've got this," her friend said fiercely. "Everyone out there is about to remember why you're special." Danny came too, and Kate, and Vincent the luthier, and even Angela, her physical therapist. This ragtag group of people who'd supported her through the worst months of her life were here to see her rise. When Robert Campbell called her name, Rebecca walked onto that legendary stage with her head high. The theater was maybe 3/4 full, not bad for a showcase, and the lights were warm and bright. She took her position at center stage, adjusted her violin, and looked out at the audience. And there, in the 5th row, she saw him. George Strait sat quietly among the crowd, wearing simple jeans and a button-down shirt, his weathered face showing the same kindness she remembered from that rainy night. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod, not of recognition exactly, but of encouragement. The simple gesture that said, "I believe in you. Show them what you can do." Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion, but she channeled it into her playing. She began with Rising, and from the first note, she knew it was right. The piece poured out of her like a confession, like a prayer, like a story that demanded to be told. She moved into Whiskey Before Breakfast without pause, her fingers flying across the strings with precision and passion. And she closed with Tennessee Whiskey, her arrangement transforming the modern country hit into something that felt both timeless and urgent. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. Then the applause erupted. Not polite industry clapping, but real, genuine appreciation. People were standing, and Rebecca saw Jack Holloway in the 3rd row, nodding with satisfaction. She saw Robert Campbell in the wings, grinning like he'd just discovered gold. But most importantly, she saw George Strait, still seated but clapping with genuine warmth, his eyes bright with something that looked like pride. Rebecca took her bow, tears streaming down her face, and limped off stage to the sound of cheers. She'd done it. 6 months ago, she'd been broken on a Nashville street, her future uncertain, her dreams shattered. And now she'd just played the Grand Ole Opry, had just proven that she was back, that she was stronger, that the gift she'd been given hadn't been wasted. Backstage, she was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, industry people, fellow musicians, but through the crowd, she saw George Strait making his way toward her. Her heart hammered as he approached, and suddenly all the speeches she'd rehearsed evaporated from her mind. "Mr. Strait," she managed, her voice breaking, Thank you. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it, but I don't know what else to say. You saved my life. You saved my music. You gave me a future when I had nothing and you didn't have to, and He held up a hand gently, that kind smile on his face. "You don't have to thank me, darling. You did all the hard work. I just helped clear the path a little." "Why?" Rebecca asked, the question that had haunted her for months. "Why did you do it? You didn't know me." George was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "A long time ago, someone helped me when I was starting out. Gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Believed in me when I had no reason to. I told myself if I ever got to where I could do the same for someone else, I would. That night in the rain, I saw someone who reminded me of myself at that age. Someone with everything to give and no safety net. So I did what someone once did for me. Paid it forward, you might say. I'll never be able to repay you," Rebecca said, tears flowing freely now. "Then don't try," George said simply. "Just do what you did today. Make beautiful music. Share your gift. And someday, when you see someone who needs a hand up, give it. That's how this works. That's how we take care of each other." He shook her hand, the same hand that had held hers on that terrible night. And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before Rebecca could say anything else. But his words stayed with her, settling into her heart like a promise. Pay it forward. Take care of each other. It was so simple, and yet so profound. He hadn't helped her, so she would owe him. He'd helped her, so she could help someone else someday. Robert Campbell found her a few minutes later, his expression triumphant. 3 labels want meetings with you. Jack Holloway rescheduled that session for next week. And I'm putting you on the Opry roster for a regular slot starting in June. Rebecca Anderson, welcome back to the music business. Rebecca laughed through her tears, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. But even as she celebrated with her friends, even as she fielded calls and requests and opportunities, her mind kept returning to George's words. Pay it forward. She would. Somehow, some way, she would make sure that the kindness shown to her rippled outward, touching other lives, creating other miracles. It was the only way to truly honor what he'd given her. 9 months after Rebecca's showcase at the Grand Ole Opry, she stood backstage at the Bridgestone Arena, not as a session musician hidden in the shadows, but as a featured performer opening for a major country act. The sold-out crowd of 18,000 people was the biggest audience she'd ever played for, and the energy in the building was electric. Her recovery had continued to progress beautifully. The cane was long gone, replaced by a slight limp that only appeared when she was exhausted. Dr. Callahan had declared her healing remarkable and had used her case in a medical presentation about the importance of comprehensive care and patient determination. Even Angela had finally run out of exercises to torture her with, graduating Rebecca from physical therapy with the highest praise the stern therapist could muster. You'll do. The session with Jack Holloway had led to a record deal with a boutique label that specialized in bluegrass and contemporary country fusion. Her first single, an instrumental version of Rising, had climbed the Americana charts and earned her recognition from critics who praised her haunting vulnerability and technical brilliance. She'd performed regularly at the Opry, building a following of fans who appreciated her unique sound. But more importantly, Rebecca had begun to pay forward the kindness she'd received. She volunteered at Vanderbilt's rehab center, working with patients who were facing their own struggles with recovery. She'd established a small fund, using a portion of her performance earnings to help musicians who couldn't afford necessary medical care. And she'd partnered with Vincent's luthier shop to provide repaired instruments to young students who wanted to learn but couldn't afford their own violins. It wasn't much compared to what George Strait had done for her, but it was something. Every person she helped, every small kindness she could offer, felt like keeping a promise. Tonight was special for another reason. After months of trying to coordinate schedules, George Strait had agreed to come to her performance. He was in the audience somewhere, and just knowing that made Rebecca's heart race with nervousness and gratitude. 5 minutes, Rebecca, the stage manager called. She did her pre-performance routine. Finger exercises, deep breaths. A quiet moment of meditation. Then she walked out onto that enormous stage, her violin in hand, and looked out at a sea of faces illuminated by phone screens and arena lights. "Good evening, Nashville," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Rebecca Anderson, and I'm honored to be here tonight. Before I play, I want to tell you a story." The crowd quieted, giving her their attention. Almost exactly a year ago, I was hit by a car on a rainy Nashville street. My leg was shattered, my career was over, my future was gone. I had no money, no family, no way to afford the surgery that could save my leg. I was ready to give up. She paused, letting the weight of that moment hang in the air. But someone helped me. Someone who didn't know me, who had no reason to care, who could have walked away and thought, "That's sad," and gone on with their life. Instead, they paid for my surgery, my recovery, my second chance at life. They did it anonymously, asking for nothing in return. And because of that kindness, I'm standing here today. Rebecca could see people in the crowd wiping their eyes, moved by the story. I learned something from that experience. I learned that we're not just individuals fighting for ourselves in this world. We're all connected. The kindness you showed today might save someone's life tomorrow. The help you give might create a ripple that reaches further than you'll ever know. So tonight, I'm dedicating this performance to everyone who's ever helped a stranger, who's ever given without expecting anything back, who's ever believed that making someone else's life better is worth the cost. She lifted her violin, found George Strait in the crowd. He was in a private box, his face reflecting pride and emotion, and began to play. The set was electric. She performed Rising first, and the crowd responded with an intensity that made her feel like the music was a living thing, connecting her to every person in that arena. She moved through her repertoire, traditional bluegrass, contemporary country, original compositions, each piece building on the last until the energy in the building felt like a storm about to break. For her final song, she'd planned to perform Tennessee Whiskey, but at the last moment, she changed her mind. Instead, she played something she'd been working on in private, a piece she called The Gift, inspired by George Strait's music. It incorporated elements of his classic style, blending them with her own voice to create something that honored his influence while remaining uniquely hers. When she finished, the standing ovation was deafening. Rebecca took her bow, overwhelmed by the response, and as she walked off stage, she knew she'd just experienced something transcendent. This was what music was supposed to be, not just performance, but connection. Not just technical skill, but emotional truth. After the show, Robert Campbell found her in the green room. "There's someone who'd like to see you," he said with a knowing smile. George Strait was waiting in a private area away from the post-show chaos. He looked older in the better light, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes still held that same warmth that had comforted her on the worst night of her life. "That was something special," he said simply. "You've come a long way, Rebecca." "Because of you," she replied. "Everything I have, everything I've accomplished, it exists because you cared enough to help." George shook his head gently. "No, darling. It exists because you fought for it. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and kept walking when it got hard." "I started a fund," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out in a rush, "for musicians who can't afford medical care. It's not much yet, but I'm putting part of every paycheck into it. And I'm working with the rehab center, trying to help other patients. I wanted to do something to honor what you did for me." George's expression softened with understanding and approval. "That's exactly right. You're keeping it moving, keeping the kindness flowing. That's how it's supposed to work." They talked for a while, about music, about recovery, about the strange and beautiful ways that life unfolds. George told her about the person who'd helped him early in his career, a club owner named Mary Jameson who'd given him his first regular gig when he was nobody, who'd believed in him when belief was in short supply. "I asked her once why she did it," George said. "She told me, because somebody did it for me, and someday you'll do it for somebody else." She was right. And now you're doing it too. Before he left, George pulled out a photograph, a picture of himself and Mary Jameson from decades ago, both young and full of hope. He handed it to Rebecca. "Keep this," he said. "Remember that you're part of a long chain of people helping people. Mary helped me. I helped you. You'll help someone else. And maybe that someone will help another. And on and on. That's how we make the world a little better. One act of kindness at a time." Rebecca clutched the photograph. tears streaming down her face. "I'll never forget this. Never." "I know you won't," George said with a smile. "Now go celebrate. You earned it." 3 years later, Rebecca Anderson had become a fixture in the Nashville music scene. Her second album had won an Americana Music Award. She'd performed at major festivals across the country. She'd been invited to collaborate with artists she'd idolized. But more than any of that, she'd stayed true to her promise. The Rebecca Anderson Foundation for Musicians' Health had grown beyond her wildest dreams. What had started as a small fund had expanded to provide comprehensive medical care, mental health services, and financial assistance to struggling musicians across Tennessee. The foundation had helped over 200 artists in its first 3 years, preventing careers from ending due to accidents, illnesses, or lack of insurance. She'd also become a mentor, taking on students who showed promise but lacked resources. One of them, a young guitarist named Michael Torres from a low-income neighborhood in East Nashville, had reminded her so much of herself that she'd taken him under her wing completely, helping him with lessons, equipment, and eventually connecting him with producers who could help shape his career. On a warm spring evening, Rebecca performed at a benefit concert for her foundation at the Ryman Auditorium, the Mother Church of Country Music. The venue was packed with supporters, fellow musicians, and fans who'd followed her journey from tragedy to triumph. As she played her final set, Rebecca spotted Michael in the wings, his guitar in hand, watching with admiration and determination in his eyes. She'd invited him to perform with her tonight, his first time on a major stage, and she could see the nervous energy radiating from him. After her set, Rebecca invited Michael on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to someone special. This is Michael Torres, and he's about to show you why I believe the future of Nashville music is in good hands." Michael walked out, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his guitar strap. Rebecca positioned herself beside him with her violin, ready to provide backup and support. She gave him an encouraging nod, and he began to play an original song he'd written called "Second Chances." The performance was raw and honest, with a few small technical mistakes that only made it more authentic. When Michael hit the final chord, the audience erupted in applause, and Rebecca saw tears streaming down the young man's face. She knew that feeling, the overwhelming rush of proving to yourself that your dreams were possible, that all the struggle had meaning. After the show, Michael found her backstage, overcome with gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Thank you for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Rebecca smiled, hearing echoes of her own words to George Strait in Michael's voice. She put a hand on his shoulder and repeated the wisdom that had been passed to her. "You don't repay it, Michael. You pay it forward. Someday, when you're established and you see someone who needs help, you give it. That's how this works. That's how we take care of each other." Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes, and Rebecca knew the message had been received. The chain continued. Mary Jameson had helped George Strait, George had helped her, and now she was helping Michael, who would someday help someone else. An unbroken line of kindness stretching across decades, touching countless lives. 5 years after the accident that had nearly ended everything, Rebecca received an unexpected invitation. George Strait was being honored at the Kennedy Center, and he'd personally requested that she perform as part of the tribute celebrating his lifetime of musical achievement and philanthropy. Standing backstage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., wearing an elegant black dress and holding her violin, the same instrument Vincent had lovingly repaired years ago, Rebecca felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about performing for an audience that included presidents and celebrities. It was about honoring the man who'd given her back her life. When her time came, she walked onto that prestigious stage and addressed the audience directly. George Strait, taught me that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you do with what you've been given. 5 years ago, he saved my life without asking for recognition or gratitude. He did it because he could, and because someone needed help. Tonight, I want to honor him not just for his legendary music career, but for the countless lives he's touched through quiet acts of kindness that most people will never know about. She played The Gift, the piece she'd written in his honor. And as the final notes faded, she looked directly at George in the audience. He was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, and when their gazes met, he mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." But Rebecca shook her head slightly and mouthed back, "Thank you." After the ceremony, at the reception, George found her among the crowd of well-wishers and dignitaries. They embraced, and for a moment, no words were necessary. They both understood the journey they'd traveled together, the invisible thread that connected them. "You know what the best part is?" George said quietly. "Watching you become exactly who you were meant to be. Seeing you pay it forward. That's worth more than any award or recognition." "I learned from the best," Rebecca replied. George chuckled, then grew serious. "Mary Jamieson passed away last year. She was 93, lived a full life. I spoke at her funeral, told everyone about how she'd changed my life by giving me a chance. Her family told me she'd helped dozens of young musicians over the years, always quietly, always asking for nothing back. She started something that's still rippling forward decades later." Rebecca felt the profound truth of that statement settle over her. Mary Jamieson, a woman she'd never met, had indirectly saved her life by helping George Strait 50 years ago. The kindness Mary had shown had traveled through time and circumstance to reach Rebecca on a rainy Nashville street. "I'd like to add her name to the foundation," Rebecca said suddenly. "The Mary Jamieson and George Strait Foundation for Musicians' Health. Her legacy deserves to be remembered too." George's eyes brightened with emotion. She would have loved that. But only if we add one condition: that everyone we help knows they're part of this chain, that they're expected to help someone else someday. "Deal," Rebecca said, extending her hand. They shook on it, sealing a promise that would extend far beyond their own lives. 10 years after the accident, Rebecca Anderson stood in the wings of the Grand Ole Opry, watching a young violinist named Claire Donovan take the stage for her debut performance. Claire was 19, recovering from a severe car accident that had nearly cost her the use of her left hand. The Rebecca Anderson Foundation had paid for her specialized surgery and rehabilitation, and Rebecca herself had mentored the girl through the darkest months of her recovery. Now Claire was about to prove that she'd conquered the odds, just as Rebecca had done a decade earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on Rebecca. 10 years ago, she'd been the broken musician desperate for a second chance. Now she was the one providing that chance to someone else. Claire played beautifully, her technique flawless, her emotion raw and authentic. When she finished, the Opry audience gave her a standing ovation, and Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. This was the gift that kept giving. This was the power of kindness multiplied across time and lives. After the show, Claire found Rebecca and hugged her tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you. You saved my music, my future, my life." Rebecca held the young woman close, then pulled back to look her in the eyes. "Listen to me carefully, Claire. Someday, you're going to see someone who needs help, someone struggling, someone desperate, someone who's lost hope. When that happens, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that someone helped you, and then helped them. That's how we honor the gift. That's how we keep the music alive." Claire nodded, understanding gleaming in her eyes. "I will. I promise." As Rebecca drove home that night through the familiar streets of Nashville, She passed the intersection of Demon and 4th Avenue, the exact spot where she'd been hit 10 years ago. She pulled over for a moment, looking at the crosswalk where her life had nearly ended and, paradoxically, where it had truly begun. So much had changed since that rainy October night. She'd gone from broken and hopeless to successful and fulfilled. She'd released 4 albums, won multiple awards, performed on stages she'd once only dreamed of. But more importantly, she'd helped over 400 musicians through the foundation, had mentored dozens of young artists, had created a legacy of kindness that would outlive her. Her phone buzzed with a text message from George Strait. Heard about Claire's performance tonight. Proud of you, Rebecca. Mary would be proud too. The chain continues. Rebecca smiled through fresh tears and typed back, "Because of you. Always because of you." His response came quickly. "No, because of us. Because of everyone who chooses kindness. That's the real power." He was right, of course. It wasn't just George's initial act of generosity that had created this ripple effect. It was every person who'd helped along the way. Lynette and Kate offering her a place to stay, Vincent repairing her violin on Faith, Jack Holloway giving her a second chance, Angela pushing her through painful therapy, Danny and the other musicians supporting her recovery. Each act of kindness had been a link in the chain, each person a contributor to the miracle. And now that chain extended forward through Claire Donovan, through Michael Torres, through every musician the foundation had helped. Somewhere out there, someone the foundation had assisted would help someone else, who would help another. And on into a future Rebecca couldn't see but could trust was brighter because of the choice to care. 20 years after the accident, Rebecca Anderson sat in her comfortable home office in East Nashville, reviewing applications for the Foundation's annual scholarship program. Her hair had strands of gray now, and her right leg still ached on cold days, but she'd never felt more content with her life's direction. The Foundation had grown beyond anything she'd imagined, now operating in 6 states and helping over 100 musicians each year. Michael Torres had become a successful producer who donated both money and time to the cause. Claire Donovan was now on the Foundation's board, having built her own successful career and dedicated herself to helping others. Rebecca's own performing had slowed. She still played regularly at the Opry and did occasional tours, but her focus had shifted to teaching, mentoring, and expanding the Foundation's reach. She'd discovered that helping others brought a satisfaction that even the biggest stage couldn't match. A knock at her door interrupted her work. Her wife, Samantha Hayes, a songwriter she'd met 7 years ago and married 3 years later, poked her head in with a smile. "There's someone here to see you," Sam said. "Says it's important." Rebecca walked to the front door and found a young woman standing on the porch, nervously clutching a violin case. She was maybe 22, with a cast on her left wrist and hope warring with desperation in her eyes. "Ms. Anderson, my name is Jennifer Martinez. I had an accident 3 weeks ago. Broke my wrist badly. The doctors say I need surgery, but my insurance won't cover it all, and I can't afford the rest. Someone told me about your foundation, and I thought maybe... I'm sorry. I shouldn't have just shown up like this. I should have gone through the proper channels." Rebecca's heart clenched with recognition. She was looking at herself 20 years ago. Young, scared, desperate, standing on the edge of losing everything. "Come in, Jennifer," Rebecca said gently, opening the door wider. "Let's talk." They sat in the living room, and Jennifer told her story. A scholarship student at Belmont University, working 3 jobs to afford Nashville while studying music performance. The accident had happened when she'd slipped on ice, and now she was facing the possibility of never playing professionally again. She had no family to help, no safety net, no options. Rebecca listened with complete attention, seeing not just Jennifer, but every musician who'd ever struggled, every dream that had hung in the balance. When Jennifer finished, tears streaming down her face, Rebecca leaned forward. "Jennifer, I'm going to tell you something that happened to me 20 years ago." She told the whole story. The accident, George Strait's anonymous help, the long road of recovery, the promise to pay it forward. Jennifer listened with wide eyes, her despair gradually shifting to hope. "The foundation will cover your surgery and rehabilitation," Rebecca said firmly. "All of it. But I'm going to ask something of you in return." Jennifer sat up straighter. "Anything. I'll do anything. Not now. Someday. When you're successful, when you're established, when you see someone who needs help, you give it. You continue the chain. You remember that someone helped you, and you help someone else. That's the only payment I require. Deal?" Jennifer's tears flowed freely now, but they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Deal. I promise. I'll never forget this." As Rebecca helped Jennifer fill out the paperwork and scheduled her appointments with the Foundation's partner doctors, she felt a profound sense of completion. This was the destiny that had been set in motion that rainy night 20 years ago. Not fame, not awards, not recognition, but this. The ability to be for someone else what George Strait had been for her. That evening, Rebecca called George Strait. They spoke regularly now, their relationship having evolved into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. She told him about Jennifer Martinez, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "There you go," he said warmly. "That's what it's all about. How many is that now?" 463, Rebecca said. 463 musicians the Foundation has helped over the past 20 years. And that's not counting all the indirect help. The mentoring, the equipment donations, the educational programs. And every single one of them is going to help someone else someday, George said. "Think about that, Rebecca. If each person helps just one other person, that's 926 lives changed. And if those people each help one person, suddenly you're at nearly 2,000. The mathematics of kindness are astounding." Rebecca smiled, thinking about Mary Jameson, about the club owner who'd helped George decades ago and had set all of this in motion. Do you think Mary knew when she helped you? Do you think she had any idea how far that one decision would reach? George was quiet for a moment. "I think she hoped. I think that's why she did it. Not knowing for certain, but trusting that kindness had a way of multiplying. She once told me, 'George, we don't help people because we know it'll make a difference. We help because it might. And that possibility is enough.'" "That's beautiful," Rebecca said softly. "That's truth," George replied. "And you're living proof of it. Mary helped me 50 years ago. I helped you 20 years ago. You helped Jennifer today. And 20 years from now, Jennifer will help someone else. The chain doesn't break. It can't break as long as we choose to keep it going." They talked for another hour, about music, about life, about the strange and wonderful paths that had led them both to this point. When Rebecca finally hung up, she walked out onto her porch and looked up at the Nashville night sky. 20 years ago, she'd been lying on a wet street, broken and hopeless. Now she was whole, successful, fulfilled, and most importantly, part of something bigger than herself. George Strait had given her more than surgery and recovery time. He'd given her a purpose, a mission, a way to transform personal tragedy into collective blessing. She thought about all the musicians the Foundation had helped, imagined them scattered across the country, making music, living their dreams, and, hopefully, someday, helping others in turn. She thought about the future recipients who didn't know yet that help was available, who were struggling in silence, who needed to know that the music community took care of its own. And she thought about Mary Jameson, a woman she'd never met, but whose kindness had literally saved her life by helping George Strait half a century ago. What a legacy! What a beautiful, powerful, transformative legacy. Rebecca pulled out her phone and typed a message to the Foundation's board members. New initiative. I want to establish a scholarship specifically for musicians over 40 who are recovering from accidents or illness. We need to make sure no one is left behind because of age. Let's discuss at next week's meeting. The responses came quickly, enthusiastic support from every board member. The foundation would continue to grow, continue to evolve, continue to reach more people who needed help. As Rebecca went back inside, she passed a framed photograph in the hallway, the picture George had given her years ago of himself and Mary Jameson. She paused to look at it, at these two people whose kindness had rippled across decades to transform her life and the lives of hundreds of others. "Thank you, Mary," Rebecca whispered to the photograph. "Thank you for starting this. Thank you for believing that helping one person was worth it. Look what you created." The photograph offered no response, of course, but Rebecca didn't need one. She knew Mary understood, wherever she was. Kindness always understood itself. The mathematics of compassion were infinite. One act could become two, could become hundreds, could become thousands, could ripple forward through time and circumstance to touch lives that hadn't even been born yet when the first choice to help was made. George Strait had concerted Rebecca's leg without asking for anything in return. The destiny had delivered something powerful. Not wealth, not fame, not recognition, but something far more valuable. The opportunity to be part of an unbreaking chain of human kindness that would extend far beyond any individual life, creating a legacy measured not in awards or achievements, but in lives saved, dreams preserved, and hope restored. And that, Rebecca understood now, was the most powerful thing of all.